Welcome to Restoria, your cozy corner for gentle bedtime stories. My name is James and I'll be your host tonight. Every night, we bring you peaceful tales designed to calm your mind and help you drift off into a deep, restful sleep. So snuggle in, close your eyes, and let the story begin. The story tonight is called The Monk Who Swept the Sky. Chapter 1. The Highest Terrace. High above the valley floor, where clouds clung to cliff edges and the wind whispered ancient names through stone, the Temple of Skyfold stood quietly. Built into the face of the mountain, its roofs shimmered with frost in the morning and glowed gold at sunset. Here, the monks lived as still as the pines that lined the ridges, their days guided by soft gongs and the scent of cedar smoke. Ansu, the sky sweeper, was the quietest of them all. Every day passed in gentle rhythm. The rising bell, the steam of tea, the brush of ink across parchment. The monks moved with deliberate care, their footsteps a language of hush. They wore robes dyed with morning dyes, soft gray and pale blue, and bowed to the world as if it were always listening. But when evening came, a different rhythm began. As the sun dipped behind the western peaks, and the valley was swallowed by violet shadow, Ansu would rise from his mat without a word. He would take the lonag-handled broom, its bristles made from the feathers of cranes who had passed peacefully, and begin the quiet climb to the highest terrace. He never rushed. The other monks paused their chanting to watch. Some closed their eyes, others stood still, palms pressed together, breathing with him from afar. When Ansu reached the terrace, he paused at the edge. The stone beneath his sandals held the last warmth of the day. The sky above, stretched wide and vast, already shimmered with the first blush of stars. Ansu bowed. Then he swept. Not the stone, but the sky. His broom, light and full of air, arced slowly through the space just above the terrace wall. Each stroke was soft, deliberate, smooth. He moved from one end to the other in a quiet dance that only the wind understood. One breath in, one stroke out. He swept away the dust of thought, the grit of worry, the haze that gathers unnoticed in the folds of a day. He did not touch the sky, not with bristle or brush, but with attention, with stillness, with the kind of presence that feels like silence deepened. Below, in the temple halls, the candles flickered more gently. Conversations slowed. The tea steamed longer in its cups, and the monks began to feel a kind of clearing, like the air itself had taken a deep breath. Ansu did not look down. He swept. He swept until the first true star blinked into being. Then he turned, bowed once more, and made the long, quiet descent. In the dining hall, his bowl of rice and broth waited for him, warm. No one asked where he had been. They all knew. It was a rhythm older than the bell, older than the scrolls, older, some whispered, than even the temple itself. That night, a new monk, barely older than a boy, approached him after supper. "Master Ansu," he said timidly. "Why do you sweep the sky?" Ansu smiled gently, wrinkles folding like calm water. "Have you ever brushed hair from someone's eyes?" The boy nodded. "Did you remove a storm?" "No, master." "Did you stop the wind?" "No." "But still," Ansu said, sipping his tea, "you made the world clearer for them, quieter, more beautiful." The boy looked down, then smiled. "I think I understand." Ansu set down his cup. "Then join me tomorrow. Bring no questions, only breath." The next evening, as the sun kissed the tips of the peaks, two figures climbed the path to the highest terrace. One broom, two pairs of feet, one purpose, and the sky, wide and watching, waited to be touched not by hand, but by care. Chapter 2: Footsteps in the Mist. The next morning, the young monk rose earlier than usual. His name was Tenzin. He had come to Skyfold Temple only 3 weeks prior, sent by his village to learn the way of quiet. His steps were still a little quick, his mind a bit full, like a teacup too near the brim. But after last night, something had shifted. He had not slept as deeply in years. His dreams had been of wind passing through pine needles, of skies so vast it hummed, and of a broom moving gently across the horizon. When the evening bell rang and the sky began to stretch toward dusk, Tenzin waited by the stone steps. Ansu arrived silently, the broom in his hands, his eyes calm as river stones. Without a word, they climbed together. The path wound up through terraces of stone and garden, past silent bells and prayer flags that danced like small flames in the wind. Tenzin noticed that Ansu never looked down. His gaze was always toward the sky, or inward, perhaps. When they reached the highest terrace, the wind greeted them first. Not a gust, not a chill. A welcome. Ansu stepped to the edge, bowed, and handed the broom to Tenzin. Tenzin blinked, surprised. "But master, I've never..." Ansu placed one hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Sweep as you breathe, that is all." Tenzin looked at the broom. It was lighter than he'd imagined, like holding air wrapped in feathers. He stepped to the edge. The sky was brushed with amber and plum, the last light of the sun curling between the mountain peaks. Somewhere far below, a bird called once and then fell silent. Tenzin lifted the broom and swept. The motion was unsure at first, too fast, too stiff. He felt silly, as if pretending to do something he did not understand. But he remembered Ansu's words. "Sweep as you breathe." He closed his eyes. In, out. He moved the broom in a slow arc, letting the rhythm of breath guide the stroke. He imagined brushing away the tension in his shoulders, the list of things he hadn't yet learned, the question that always lingered. Am I doing this right? He swept again. The wind answered not loudly, but like a thread of silk moving past his ear. The broom made no sound, but the sky did. Behind him, Ansu sat cross-legged on the stone, eyes half-lidded, watching not the sky, but the way the boy's shoulders softened. By the time the stars began to appear, Tenzin had lost track of time. His arms moved in slow rhythm. His thoughts no longer jostled. Something in him had grown still. He turned. Ansu rose and bowed. Tenzin returned the gesture. Together, they descended. That night, Tenzin slept without dreams. And when the morning bell rang, he awoke not with thoughts, but with silence. A good silence. The kind that made space inside. Throughout the day, the other monks noticed. His footsteps were lighter, his hands steadier. During midday tea, one of the older brothers leaned in and whispered, "You walked like a storm when you arrived. Now you walk like a breeze." Tenzin smiled. "I was taught to sweep the sky." And though many did not understand, they nodded. Because they had seen the way the sky changed when Ansu swept. Now they saw it in Tenzin too. That evening, as shadows grew long and the sun prepared its slow bow, Ansu did not climb the terrace alone. Tenzin walked beside him. 2 brooms, 2 sets of breath, 1 sky, and the wind, ancient and kind, curled gently around them, ready to be brushed clear once more. Chapter 3: The Night of Restless Winds. It began with the bells. Not the ones the monks rang for prayer or tea, but the wind chimes that lined the eaves of the temple. They trembled all at once, as though something had disturbed the silence between them. It was not a storm. The sky was clear. Yet the wind rolled over the mountain like a murmuring crowd, full of voices not quite spoken, thoughts not quite stilled. The monks, scattered through their evening routine copying scrolls, tending lamps, steeping herbs, paused and looked up. Tenzin felt it first. As he passed through the courtyard carrying a pot of fresh water, the air around him quivered. He paused beside the old stone basin and listened. The wind was not loud, but it carried a weight. Not of rain or snow, but of worry. He looked up toward the terrace, and there stood Ansu, already climbing. Tenzin followed. Tonight, the wind did not greet them with softness. It wrapped around them in hurried loops, restless and uneven, tugging at sleeves, pulling at thoughts. The terrace, usually still as breath, felt uncertain. Ansu stood at the edge. He did not sweep. He simply watched. Tenzin stepped beside him, holding the broom. "Should I begin?" he asked. Ansu closed his eyes. Not yet. Below, in the temple halls, the monks shifted uneasily. The tea left a bitter note on their tongues. The candlelight flickered as if unsure of its place. The wind, though not strong, stirred something in every room. Ansu finally spoke. "The sky is full tonight." Tenzin looked up. "But there are no clouds." "Not all clouds are seen," Ansu replied. "Some are made of thought, of old conversations, of feelings we never spoke aloud." The wind stirred again, circling their feet. "Can we sweep them away?" Tenzin asked. Ansu nodded. "But not from here." He turned, and instead of descending, he walked higher past the terrace, past the stone bell tower, up narrow steps carved directly into the mountain's face. Tenzin followed. They reached the rooftop, rarely visited, flat and open to the stars. The wind was stronger here, but not cruel. It was like an old friend pacing restlessly, waiting for someone to listen. Ansu raised his broom. With one slow breath, he swept. The motion was wider here, more open. Each stroke moved through sky, not just air. It was not the broom that swept, it was the attention. The intention. The stillness wrapped inside movement. Tenzin followed suit. Together, they moved in rhythm, not mirrored, but harmonious like two wings of the same bird. The wind began to shift. It slowed. It circled them, curious. Ansu whispered, "Let it speak." And for a moment, the wind did. Not in words, but in feeling. Relief, release. Like something long held had finally been exhaled. Below, the monks felt it too. In the meditation hall, a novice monk who could not sleep laid his head down and drifted off. In the kitchen, a cook's hands stilled. The knife paused above a root, and her shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. The wind moved through each room, brushing across foreheads like the palm of a parent soothing a child. On the rooftop, Ansu lowered his broom. The stars, once hidden in the invisible haze, now sparkled clear. Tenzin bowed. The wind finished, settled. Ansu sat cross-legged at the center of the rooftop. The broom lay beside him, but his hands rested quietly in his lap. Tenzin sat beside him. They said nothing. Nothing more was needed. And as the mountain slept beneath them, a stillness deeper than silence settled into every room. Not from sweeping, but from listening. Chapter 4. The Bell Without a Sound. The days after the night of restless winds were unusually still. The sky above Skyfold Temple stretched like silk clear, quiet, without even a thread of cloud. The prayer flags hung unmoving. The wind chimes along the eaves stayed silent. It was as though the mountain had drawn a long, deep breath and now held it, suspended in a moment of calm. But even in peace, something shifted. Tenzin noticed first. He was tending the herb garden beside the temple wall when he felt it a faint vibration beneath his feet, as if the earth itself was humming a tune too soft to hear. He paused, set down the wooden trowel, and closed his eyes. It came again. A stillness, yes, but not empty. Full. That evening, Ansu did not go to the highest terrace. Instead, he climbed to the great bronze bell, tower the one that had not rung in many years. The monks gathered in the courtyard below. None spoke. They watched as Ansu stood beside the bell, broom in hand, eyes half closed in thought. Tenzin joined him. "Why here?" he asked softly. Ansu looked at the bell. "Because sometimes silence rings louder than sound." He raised the broom and swept. Not the sky, not the stone. He swept around the bell itself in slow, looping arcs. The feathered bristles stirred the air like ripples in a pond, moving through stillness rather than against it. With each stroke, the wind returned just barely, a breeze that stirred sleeves, a current that nudged robes, and, ever so faintly, the bell began to sing. Not in clangs, not in chimes, but in resonance. A low, barely audible hum, felt more than heard, like the space around the bell remembered what it meant to echo. Tenzin stepped closer. He, too, swept, and the bell deepened its song knot, louder but wider. The vibration spread down into the stones of the temple, across the wooden floors, into the bones of those who stood watching. It filled their chests, quieting their hearts. The monks closed their eyes. They breathed in rhythm. With each sweep, the mountain seemed to breathe with them. And then, Ansu stopped. He set down the broom and sat beside the bell. Tenzin did the same. The humming continued for a while, then faded, not into silence, but into a silence that felt different, like the pause between two verses of a song. Later, as the monks returned to their rooms, they did not speak of what they had felt, but all through the temple, the silence held. Not an absence, a presence. That night, no wind passed through the corridors. No thoughts stirred where sleep had settled. And in the dreams of many monks, there was the sound of a Bella bell that had never rung, and yet had always been heard. Chapter 5. The Visitor. It was just before dawn when the visitor arrived. The temple gates, carved of cypress and carved with clouds, rarely opened. Yet on this morning, the great doors creaked softly, as if moved by the breath of the mountain itself. No gong was rung. No voice called out. Only footsteps bare, deliberate against the stone path. Tenzin was the first to see her. He was carrying water from the spring when he paused and turned toward the garden. There, standing beside the stone lanterns, was a woman in traveling robes the color of autumn bark. Her hair was streaked with white, though her eyes held the brightness of someone younger. She bowed. Tenzin bowed in return. "I've come," she said simply, "to rest." Tenzin said nothing. He only nodded, gestured gently toward the inner halls, and fetched Ansu. When Ansu appeared, the woman bowed again, deeper this time, not out of ceremony, but recognition. "I've heard of the one who sweeps the sky," she said, "and I've walked far with heavy thoughts. I wondered if some of them might lift, just by being near." Ansu studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and began to walk. She followed. They climbed together, not to the terrace, not to the bell, but to the ledge above the pine grove, where the wind liked to sleep. Ansu handed her the broom without a word. She smiled softly, her fingers closing over the feathered shaft. "I haven't swept in many seasons," You never stopped, Ansu said, only forgot where. She stepped to the edge. The sky was still dim, just shifting from ink to silver. The first rays of morning hadn't yet touched the tips of the distant peaks. She raised the broom and swept, slowly, gently, with care that had lived long in her shoulders but never found its way into her hands. The strokes were light, but each carried the weight of memories, unspoken farewells, old regrets folded like notes in her chest. She swept them out, not to discard them, but to offer them to the wind. The mountains stirred. Birds called softly from the trees below. The pine needles danced for the first time in days. Tenzin watched from the lower path. He felt the shift, like a blanket being drawn up to the chin of the world. When she finished, the woman rested the broom against a stone and bowed to the open sky. Ansu joined her in silence. They sat for some time, watching the first sunlight turn the clouds golden. "I will not stay long," she said at last. "Nor should you," Ansu replied. "This is not a place to keep. It's a place to remember." She nodded. When she rose, she touched Tenzin's shoulder as she passed. "Keep sweeping," she said. He bowed, and as she disappeared down the path, the wind followed, not rushed, not hurried, just curious, just calm. Later that day, Ansu returned the broom to its resting place. He poured 2 cups of tea for himself. One for the breeze and sat quietly as the steam curled upward like a prayer. Sometimes, the sky is heavy with more than weather, and sometimes, all it needs is a little help. Letting go. Chapter 6. After the sweeping. That evening, the sky wore no clouds. It stretched out like silk unfurled, brushed in pale lavender and soft gold. The peaks around Skyfold Temple held the last light of day like candles offered in silence. Every stone, every beam of wood seemed to breathe a little deeper. Ansu climbed the terrace alone, not because he was lonely, but because this night was different. It was not for teaching, nor for clearing. It was for being. He carried no broom. Below, the temple settled gently into dusk. Tenzin tended the last lanterns, his movements now calm as a river. The other monks sat in meditation, their thoughts slow and steady. Tonight, no sweeping was needed, because tonight, the sky was already clear. Ansu stood at the terrace's edge. The stars blinked into view, not hurried, not shy, just arriving, as they always did. He closed his eyes, breathed, and with that breath, he offered no prayer. Only presence, only being, only the quiet kind of care that expects nothing in return. The wind curled around him, playful and soft. It tugged at the hem of his robe like a child asking to be held. He smiled, and then, slowly, he sat, back straight, hands resting palm up in his lap, gaze turned not upward, not inward, but simply outward, into the space where sky becomes space and breath becomes breeze. Below, Tenzin looked up. He did not climb the steps. He did not disturb the stillness. Instead, he took his broom, walked to the middle terrace, and swept, with no lesson in mind, with no thought of whether it helped. He swept because it was time. And as he did, the wind answered. It moved through the halls like memory. It rustled the scrolls and kissed the edges of the ink. It rang the chimes on sonat to wake, but to remind, and one by one, the monks smiled in their sleep, because they remembered the sky does not need fixing, only noticing, and not every kindness is loud. Some are soft, like a breath, like a feather, like the last sweep of the day. And so the mountain dreamed, and Ansu, sitting quiet and still at the highest edge, remained, not waiting, just present. And in that presence, the sky swept itself.